We're back again. This is part 2 of what I think might be 3. So part 2 of 3 of the Slaughter Fallacy. So we're talking about the sort of what we think is the canonical view held by the status quo or the mainstream in the world government movement. And we used Anne-Marie Slaughter's book because it is kind of a canonical representation of that view. So we left off in number 1 with this comment on page 134 that I read, and my concern there was just the fact that the transgovernmental nature of this system she's describing is yet weaker than a confederacy, and confederacies don't tend to work very well themselves. So there's a lack of durability here, and the question of how it's going to mature to durability before it rends itself to pieces is really the question. That was that comment, and the next comment that I had looked at or noticed, thought was worth mentioning, was on 144, and this is where she talks about the vertical dimension, the vertical network, and she's going to talk about the horizontal as well. I had mentioned previously that the vertical network, I had described that as an information network, but it's a little bit more than that. That was just kind of one aspect of the vertical and the horizontal, or excuse me, the horizontal. Another aspect of the horizontal we'll show here in a little bit, but it's the idea of networks, a network of networks, in which you take regional organizations, like OPEC or something, maybe not OPEC, but Mercosur, something like that, and as a network, you then network that with other networks like it. That's another aspect of the horizontal. But I'm just going to read what she says about the vertical dimension. And the more we go, the more we're going to get into how shocking this stuff is. If you actually read it for what it's saying, it's astonishing what's being said. And this is the mainstream view. So here it is. Here it is. The organizations just described demonstrate the potential substantive and geographic range of a networked world order. So she just described organizations like the OECD and the G20 and all that. That's what she was talking about. Even accepting that these organizations may be much stronger and more effective than a traditional hierarchical view of such organizations would suggest, they remain considerably weaker than organizations like the European Union or the WTO. The European Union and the WTO have, at least in the popular perception, real power, meaning coercive power. Such power contains a paradox, however, and this is interesting. They are the clubs that non-members want to get into. Their effectiveness is directly related to their exclusivity, and hence their power both of implementation and of attraction. Here is also the paradox of government networks. In their horizontal form, they are looser and less coercive, even aspirationally, than other forms of international organization. They thus guarantee that power remains principally in the hands of nation-states through their national officials. But in their vertical form, government networks can be the critical ingredient that gives a supranational organization real power. The possibility of direct relations between a supranational court and national courts, or between a supranational regulatory agency and its domestic equivalent, pierces the shell of state sovereignty, and creates a channel whereby supranational officials can harness the coercive power of national officials. A disaggregated world order would include vertical as well as horizontal government networks. So this is out of the book, A New World Order by Anne-Marie Slaughter. This is all the stuff I'm reading is out of this book. Direct quotes out of this book. So here again, I'm just going to read that last part again. It's very interesting. The possibility of direct relations between a supranational court and national courts, or between a supranational regulatory agency and its domestic equivalent, pierces the shell of state sovereignty and creates a channel whereby supranational officials can harness coercive power of national officials. So here again, this continues that pattern that we're seeing, this blueprint that's being laid out of basically, essentially co-opting national powers for these networks, these horizontal and vertical networks, and using them to do their bidding, whatever that may be. And she reinforces the fact that a disaggregated world order would include both the vertical and the horizontal networks. So again, we're still talking about an organization or a group of people doing this who are unaccountable, unelected. No one knows who they are, and in fact, all of this exists now. And that's the irony of this, is how so few people, even realize this. This is the quote-unquote New World Order that when people talk about a New World Order, this is that New World Order. It's evolving, it's intensifying, but this is it. We're describing the blueprint of that as it exists today, and where the supporters of this expect it to go. So that was an interesting comment. And then let's see. On the next page, where I picked up something I thought was really interesting, was 171, if you're following. So on page 171, she writes, and she talks about a guy named Rostiala. So Rostiala is a guy. He's just basically a I think an economist. Let me see if I have that right. Politician, I believe, also. Cal Rostiali is a young legal scholar and political scientist. Okay, so he's a legal scholar and political scientist. She introduced him earlier in the book. So this part is interesting. So here we go. Rostialos. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Study of government networks among securities, antitrust, and environmental regulators leads him to conclude that networks promote regulatory export from stronger to weaker states. Let me read that again. Rostiala's study of government networks among securities, antitrust, and environmental regulators leads him to conclude that networks promote regulatory export from stronger to weaker states. Okay. In that statement, he's talking about the networks. He's talking about the same networks that Slaughter's talking about. They already exist, so he's talking about those networks and how they can promote the regulatory export, basically the exporting of regulation from a stronger to a weaker state. This transfer of rules, practices, and whole institutional structures in turn promotes policy convergence among states, an effect that he attributes to special characteristics of government networks and to the role of network effects, quote, network effects, a concept developed by economists to explain the impact of private commercial networks. Rostiala also finds that networks permit cooperation that would not otherwise be possible, perhaps, and that they can build a capacity in weak states that allow them to comply more readily with international obligations. The process of capacity building in the regulatory context was discussed in Chapter 1 and with regard to parliaments in Chapter 3. Here's where I see, and this is just one example, there are actually several cases where I have seen a nexus and a connection between the Slaughter's or the canonical current view of world governance and Western neoliberal democracy. These schools of thought are the same schools of thought. First of all, the same people in these groups, the same people are in both of these groups. That's the first clue. It's all the same writers, it's all the same people in those groups. But one of the characteristics of the Western neoliberal democracy is called different things in different parts of the world. I think in South America they call it El Modelo, and other parts of the world they call it different things, but it's all the same. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are strongly involved in this. There's a lot of criticism of them and in the suggestion that they make predatory loans to developing countries, really to deliberately put them in a bad economic position. Kind of a neo-colonialism. Also capitalism generally. It has been said, and there's been this criticism, that capitalism has in some ways invaded the very idea of liberalism, to the extent that what neoliberal Western democracy has come to represent today is more of really just capitalist finding new ways to influence government and to control policy so that they can expand their markets, globalize, and deal with the problem of capital accumulation. In other words, they need more markets, so they need to globalize. So they use things like the IMF and the World Bank to do that, to go in and privatize all these public institutions. That's one of the hallmarks of the neoliberal Western democracy idea, is you go and you privatize everything, which opens up bigger markets for the capitalists. It's just one way to expand their markets. This is a hallmark pattern trait. If you look at all of the IMF and World Bank agreements made all over the world, they all involve these stipulations about privatizing everything, thereby expanding markets for capitalist investors. And this is a tangent that could go on forever, so I'm just really touching the highlights here. But there is clearly an ingrained connection here between what they're doing and what you might call a kind of neo-colonialism. What Rostiala is saying here is, to me, smacks of the same kind of neo-colonialism. So here's another nexus I see between them. And where I'm getting that from is he talks about, well, I mean, just what he's saying. He's saying that these networks facilitate the export of regulation from stronger to weaker countries. Well, if the regulations involve privatization, for example, that's a part of a neo-colonial system. The whole point being to use those networks to privatize all these agencies and institutions that were once public, so that you can expand the market for capitalists. This is just one example, but you see throughout this this pattern of just a repeated pattern of nexus between Western neoliberal democracy and this this particular view of world government, which I call the Slaughter Fallacy or the Slaughter view. So that was a very interesting comment. So the next one is the next comment I saw of interest was on page 178. Let's see, and there, and I'll just read that comment. I'll just read that quote. What better source on how to run a security system, regulate commercial banks, protect the environment, pursue different types of criminals, safeguard human rights, or foster business competition than networks of government officials from around the world charged with precisely those functions? This is interesting. These government officials understand themselves to be in the business of collecting, distilling, and disseminating information, precisely the editing or filtering role that is such a crucial source of soft power. This is incredible, what we're reading here. So basically what she's suggesting is that these unaccountable, unelected, nameless people we don't know anything about are the best to run the systems that they're using to apply their coercive powers, and this information filtering and editing that they're doing. It's very interesting. So that was an interesting comment. I thought very. So on page 218, there's another comment that I thought was very interesting, and all of this is doing a really good job of characterizing the popular view amongst this school of thought in the world government movement, if you will. So let me just read this one here, this comment here. Here we go. A frequent and easy charge. And now she's getting into. She actually does start getting into some of the objections people have made to this school of thought, and she tries to address it, but doesn't really do it. I don't think at all, really. But anyway, this is where she begins trying to do that. A frequent and easy charge is lack of accountability. Well, yes, that is easy. Yet this claim highlights another difficulty with criticisms of government networks and with figuring out how to respond to those criticisms. Accountability to whom? She wrote, this is a quote directly from the book. Accountability to whom? Even assuming we know what accountability means in these circumstances. That someone this intelligent and this educated would have to ask that question is astonishing. Accountability to whom? The accountability is to the people that are subject to those laws. That is a no-brainer. It's an automatic. There shouldn't be any question as far as answering that. That she would even pose that question in this book is shocking. Accountability to whom? Accountability to the people who are affected by all of these decisions. That's who. So if someone doesn't even acknowledge that there needs to be accountability to the people that are being affected by this, well, then it's no wonder that there's this pattern of errors I was talking about, where there's no realization that, you know, a national constituency is not an international constituency. Someone who's a representative of a particular national constituency is not representative then automatically of an international constituency, obviously. So this complete sort of ignoring of that fact throughout the book, and that pattern of that, isn't surprising when you read that sentence. Accountability to whom? Because this person, the author doesn't, and I think most in this camp don't even realize. You know, they don't seem to even understand what a social contract is, and what accountability means, and why it is that they're even justified in being in the positions they're in, or why there might be some justification for them being in the positions they're in. That justification only exists because they are accountable to the people that are being affected by their decisions. Society should have delegated that authority to them and should be able to revoke it. So certainly they should be accountable to the public. So anyway, government networks are largely composed of national government officials interacting either with each other or less frequently with their supranational counterparts. Those national officials are responsible to national constituencies for their domestic and, as well, we shall see, their transgovernmental activities. At the same time, taken all together, government networks constitute a global governance system. Again, the same pattern. Here again, she said, and it's like, where did we hear that saying about if you say something false enough times, people will believe it? She just keeps saying the same thing over and over and over. That the national officials are representative of an international constituency. That is logically invalid. It is internally inconsistent. It doesn't make any sense. It's pablum, and it's really puerile in a way. But you know, you keep saying it enough, and I guess the reader will eventually buy it and not do any critical thinking. I don't know. But yeah, and that's what my note here. So I just made a note here. That's what my note says. Is that this is a problem statement. Then further down, let's see what we got here. Those who would keep domestic borders hermetically sealed must contend with a far larger phenomenon of globalization. Well, right, and that's technologically driven. I think we said that somewhere. But the problem is that yeah, the technology itself is driving global. That's what's fundamentally behind globalization. It's the fact that people can communicate now and interact in ways that technology didn't afford before, which the other side of that coin is the fact that people can exercise powers in ways they couldn't before. And that's a problem because that creates a power vacuum. So we had talked about that. And those who would equalize the distribution of power across nations must grapple with the tremendous asymmetries built into our current world order, from the existence of permanent members of the UN Security Council to weighted voting in the IMF and the World Bank. And the simple answer to that is to supersede them with a system that consists of new ideas, because these are all, she's talking about all old ideas, and that's the problem, and that's the point we've tried to make as General Federalists, is even if you don't really, you know, think that General Federalism is the answer, clearly new ideas are needed, period. Some new ideas are needed, and the old ideas aren't going to work. That's obvious. Completely agree there. But trying to apply them now in a different way and repackage them, which is what Western neoliberal democracy is doing, and what the Slaughter camp is doing, what the Slaughter Fallacy is all about, it's not going to solve it. It's not going to work. So, so that was that comment. There's the let's see, this the other one. What other note I made? Page 218, what we just read. Then on page 220, I noticed another comment she made. Yet transparency can make the network even more accessible to sectoral interest pressures, leading to over-politicization in the form of distorted representation of specific domestic or international preferences. Well, it's good to see that she is finally seeing things clearly. This is a Western neoliberal democracy advocate who is finally seeing the world clearly. She's just acknowledged and admitted that when you open the door to the general public to get involved directly in the process of actually creating public policy, it's a problem. But she's saying it very deceptively, and she's being deflective about it because she knows it's not PC in this world, so she's trying to be careful about how she says that. It's not really an honest conversation. She's being deceptive about it, but she's saying that that when what she's calling, the word she's using is transparency, but really what she's really talking about is direct public participation. Direct public participation in policy making will result in things like over-politicization in the form of distorted representation of specific domestic faction. That's what that is. And let me read that again. In the form of distorted representation of specific domestic or international preferences. That would be faction. So general federalism proposes a solution where there's genuine transparency, while at the same time there is a way to remove this element, this corrosive element that tends to do what she's talking about. So anyway, interesting admission, but then if I keep reading, there's nothing here, there's no solution, there's no idea about how to solve that. It's just, we'll just keep using that. We'll just keep doing that because we don't really have a good answer. So the next comment was on 235, and so here in this section she's talking about making government networks visible. In other words, this transparency issue again. And let me see how much of this I want to read to you. I don't know if I want to read all of that. That's quite a bit. But I just want to be sure, though, that I do quote from the book, because some of these statements are so fantastic. I think I need to read at least this first part. So these are incredible statements being made in this book. And this book is the Bible, by the way, of the of the Il Modello, of the current. What the word for it is, but the status quo. It's the canon of the status quo. So let me read this part. In a true world